Episode 336, Some Good News. This is The Change Underground. I'm your host, John. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. From a piece on Agriland by Aisling O'Brien on the 4th of May 2023, quote, Irish wind farm provided 35% of the country's electricity last month, according to figures from Wind Energy Ireland. This is the best ever performance by wind farms for the month of April. The amount of electricity produced by wind energy last month was up 8% against April 2022, while the share of demand met rose from 32 to 35% as demand for power continues to rise. Wind energy has met 38% of the country's power demand for the first 4 months of 2023. End quote. And from Antonia Zimmerman on Politico.eu, dated the 27th of April 2023, quote, Feldheim, Germany. The village of Feldheim has no local shop but counts 55 wind turbines. An otherwise nondescript hamlet of just 130 people an hour's drive southwest of Berlin, Feldheim's claim to fame is its huge investment in energy infrastructure. As well as the wind turbines, the village also has its own biogas plant, a wood chip burner, a battery storage system and a solar power plant. All of the electricity and heat it consumes is produced locally, which the village says makes it self-sufficient and carbon neutral. That's made it quite a tourist attraction for those interested in how to go green, end quote. And from Totally Renewable Yackandandah, quote, 100% volunteer-run community group with the lofty goal of powering this small Victorian town with 100% renewable energy, giving resilient savings, lower emissions and showing that it can be done. End quote. This last example is, of course, from rural Victoria. The community has set up its own energy company, purchased batteries, PV cells, and a mini-grid. What all these stories tell us is that the change, the transition, the future is on its way. From a 20,000 metre view, the Germans have been all in on the transition long before most of the rest of us, with schemes to pay coal miners the same salary as they receive mining, but to perform mine site rehabilitation work, a re-greening of the mine sites in effect. The German government, despite their reliance on Russian gas and oil, has been driving their replacement. In Australia, the Yackandandah example, and I just love saying that name, Yackandandah, and I've been there and it's got reasonable coffee, so it's worth a visit, has been developed with community support, buy-in, literally, and against the prevailing policy position of a federal government beholden to the mining industry. There's a drive now with changed governments to build an electric vehicle market. Apart from the better off buying vehicles directly, the incentives are aimed at fleet buyers to create within a decade an actual second-hand market for such vehicles. The missing piece is, of course, the need for emission limits on vehicles sold here in Australia. We are one of the few countries without this legislation, so we tend to have the less efficient fossil fuel vehicles dumped on our market, and electrical vehicles are unnecessarily expensive. From what I've seen from afar, and up close in 2018, the Irish situation is somewhere in between. Plenty of wind turbines, and Ireland is at least as windy as Tasmania, but not as much government support as there could be. It is only recently possible to generate electricity at home, or in a business with PV cells, say, and send the excess to the grid. This system allows lots of small producers to generate locally and use the grid as a battery. Now, those of you who have the image of Ireland as a permanently wet place, and it is to some extent, I guess, but I have a memory of a business chocolate or biscuit factory or something. I just can't be sure, but in Dublin, and it was providing most, if not all, of the power requirements for the building. If any of you can remember the story I'm thinking of, please let me know. There's a link in the show notes for emailing. And on the other side of the equation, the emissions side, another piece from Agriland also dated the 4th of May, and this time from Stella Meehan, entitled Ministers Announce Scientific Breakthrough on Cattle Emissions. Quote, Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine and Minister of State with Special Responsibilities for Research and Innovation have today announced a world-first scientific breakthrough that can enable a reduction of methane from the Irish cattle herd through animal genetics. According to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, this will be possible because of the publication of methane evaluations which will enable breeding programs to reduce daily methane emissions in beef cattle, end quote. This might seem a longer-term response to the problem, but it may not be so. Embryo flushing, artificial insemination, and attention to detail can have a change in genetics propagated quite quickly. It occurs reasonably regularly here with when new breeds are brought into the country. This might seem odd, but with the strict biosecurity regulations we have, all this occurs in agricultural quarantine stations at huge expense to the importers. So the ability to build up numbers quickly helps to cover the costs for these new breeds. It can be done, so this is indeed a good news story. In parallel to this approach is the currently in the market approach of adding a variety of red seaweed to cattle feed here in Australia, which has shown a drop in methane production of up to 98%. Combine the two methods and we're well on the way. Autumn is a dangerous period of time for me and we're well into it here. I love the weather, the changes and the settling down for winter, but it also can trigger periods of downness, not quite clinical depression, but a lowness of feelings. Normally I just leave the lights on later than most people would, and that seems to do the trick. However, I've realised the last few episodes have been heading into the "we'll all be ruined" view of life. Hopefully this episode has turned a corner. We really can get the changes implemented in time. I'm coming to the conclusion that we actually will. Things will not return to the weather patterns and temperatures of a century ago, but they will take time to ease back. They will probably continue to deteriorate in the short term, but our grandkids and theirs will have a habitable planet. So let's get on with it, shall we? Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.